The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of the USS Intrepid as Lieutenant Sarah walked the plank that would change her life forever. Not a real plank, of course, but the gangway that led her away from everything she had worked for since she was 18 years old. Behind her, the whispers followed like a cold wind. There goes the liar. Good riddance. Should have known better than to trust her. Sarah kept her chin up and her shoulders straight, even as her heart broke into 1,000 pieces. In her hands, she carried a small box containing her personal items from her quarters. 15 years of faithful service to the United States Navy, and it all came down to this walk of shame. The accusations had come out of nowhere 3 weeks ago. Missing supplies, reports, money that couldn't be accounted for, all pointing back to her. Sarah had protested her innocence, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. Her commanding officer, Captain Bradley, had looked at her with such disappointment that it cut deeper than any blade. "I trusted you," he had said during the investigation. "We all did. How could you betray that trust?" Sarah had stood at attention, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Sir, I did not commit these crimes. I have served this ship and this country with honor for 15 years. I would never." "The evidence says otherwise," Captain had interrupted. "Petty Officer Williams has provided testimony that places you at the supply depot on the dates in question. The computer logs show access under your credentials, and we found $5,000 in cash hidden in your quarters." The cash, that was the detail that haunted Sarah most. She had no idea how it got there. She lived simply, sent most of her pay to her elderly parents back in California. Everyone who knew her understood that money meant little to her compared to duty and honor. But Petty Officer Jake Williams had been convincing in his testimony. Young, earnest, with tears in his eyes as he described seeing Lieutenant removing supplies from the depot late at night. "I didn't want to believe it," he had said. "She was like a mentor to me, but I saw what I saw." The court-martial had been swift. The evidence was clear, they said. Sarah was guilty of theft, fraud, and conduct unbecoming an officer. She was stripped of her rank, dismissed from service, and would face no jail time only because of her previously spotless record. Now, as she walked down that gangway for the last time, Sarah felt the weight of every stare. Some faces showed disappointment. Others showed disgust. A few showed what might have been sympathy, but those people looked away when she met their eyes. At the bottom of the gangway, a taxi waited. Sarah had nowhere else to go except back to her childhood home in Riverside, California. Her parents, both in their 70s, had stood by her throughout the ordeal. "We know our daughter," her mother had said over the phone. "We know what kind of person you are." But knowing the truth and proving it were two different things. As the taxi pulled away from Naval Base San, Sarah watched the Intrepid grow smaller in the rear window. She had given the Navy everything. Her youth, her prime years, her heart and soul. She had served in 3 deployments, earned commendations for bravery, and had been on track for promotion to lieutenant commander. "All gone now." The taxi driver glanced in the mirror. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Sarah managed a small smile. "You could say that." "Things have a way of working out," the driver said. "Might not seem like it now, but truth has a way of coming to light." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. Sometimes truth stayed buried and innocent people paid the price. She had seen it happen to others. She just never thought it would happen to her. The drive to Riverside would take 3 hours. 3 hours to think about what came next. At 33 years old, Sarah was starting over with nothing but her discharge papers and a ruined reputation. Who would hire a disgraced former naval officer? But as the California landscape rolled by, Sarah made herself a promise. She would not let this break her. She had survived boot camp, survived deployments in dangerous waters, survived the loss of friends in combat. She would survive this too. And somehow, someway, she would find out who had really committed those crimes, and why they had chosen her to take the fall. The truth was out there, she just had to find it. The small apartment above's restaurant smelled like ginger and soy sauce, just as it had when Sarah was growing up. Her parents, David and Lily, had run the family restaurant for 35 years, serving authentic Chinese food to the people of Riverside. The apartment above had been Sarah's childhood home, and now it was her refuge. "You look too thin," her mother said, setting a bowl of wonton soup in front of Sarah. It had been 2 weeks since her discharge, and Lily had made it her mission to feed her daughter back to health. "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah said, though they both knew it wasn't true. She barely slept, barely ate, and spent most of her time staring at her laptop screen, searching for jobs that would hire someone with her tainted record. David looked up from the restaurant receipts he was reviewing at the kitchen table. "Any luck with the job search today?" Sarah shook her head. 3 interviews this week. All went well until they asked about why I left the Navy. The moment I have to explain about the discharge, I can see it in their eyes. They've already made up their minds. "Their loss," David said firmly. "Anyone who knows you knows what kind of person you are." But that was the problem. The people who knew her were back on the ship or scattered across different bases. Out here in the civilian world, she was just another job applicant with a questionable background. The restaurant's front door chimed, and Lily went downstairs to help the customer. Sarah could hear voices drifting up through the floorboards. The dinner rush was starting, and soon her parents would be too busy to worry about her. Sarah's laptop chimed with a new email. Another rejection, this one from a security firm that had seemed promising. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." She closed the laptop and walked to the window that overlooked Riverside's Main Street. It was a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Word had already spread about Sarah's return and the circumstances surrounding it. She could feel the stares when she walked to the grocery store or the post office. Mrs. from the flower shop had been kind enough to say hello yesterday, but even she had seemed uncomfortable. "We're praying for you, dear," she had said, which somehow made Sarah feel worse instead of better. The front door chimed again, and Sarah heard a different voice. Younger, male, something about it made her freeze. "Is Sarah here? I need to speak with her." Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Petty Officer Jake Williams. She crept to the top of the stairs and peered down into the restaurant. There he was, still in his Navy uniform, looking nervous and fidgety. His eyes darted around the small dining room as if he expected someone to jump out at him. "She's not available," Lily said coolly. Sarah's mother had never been one to hide her feelings, and she clearly didn't like this young man. "Please, Mrs., it's important. I drove all the way from San. I need to talk to her about what happened on the ship." Sarah's heart began to race. Why was Williams here? He had been the key witness against her. His testimony had sealed her fate. What could he possibly want now? Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself walking down the stairs. Williams turned when he heard her footsteps, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Fear. "Jake," she said quietly, "what are you doing here?" He glanced around the restaurant, which thankfully only had 2 other customers, both absorbed in their meals. "Can we talk somewhere private?" Sarah led him to a corner booth, her mind racing. Lily watched from behind the counter, ready to intervene if needed. William sat across from her, his hands shaking slightly as he placed them on the table. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry." Sarah stared at him. "Sorry for what?" "For lying, for destroying your life, for being such a coward." His voice cracked, and Sarah realized he was close to tears. The restaurant seemed to spin around her. "What are you talking about?" Williams looked over his shoulder, then leaned forward. "It wasn't you. You never took anything from that supply depot. You never any reports. It was never you." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. "Then who?" Chief Petty Officer Martinez and Seaman. They had a whole operation going, selling supplies on the black market, making thousands of dollars every month. When the investigation started getting close, they needed someone to take the fall. And they chose me. Williams nodded miserably. You were perfect. Clean record, but you had access to everything they needed, and you lived alone, so it was easy to plant evidence in your quarters. Sarah's hands clenched into fists on the table. The money, you helped them plant it. Martinez threatened my family, Williams said desperately. He said if I didn't testify against you, something might happen to my little sister. She's only 8 years old, Sarah. I couldn't risk it. So you destroyed my life instead. The words hung in the air between them. Williams was crying now, not caring who saw. I haven't slept since the court-martial. I keep thinking about what I did to you. You were always good to me. You helped me when I was struggling with navigation training. You never treated me like I was stupid or worthless. Sarah felt a mix of rage and pity. This young man had been manipulated and threatened, but his weakness had cost her everything. Why are you telling me this now? Because Martinez is getting sloppy. He thinks he's untouchable now that you're gone. But Seaman is getting nervous. He's been drinking too much, talking too much. Some of the other crew members are starting to ask questions. Sarah leaned back in the booth, her mind racing. What kind of questions? About how you could have moved those supplies by yourself. About why you would have stolen things you didn't need. About how someone like you could have hidden a criminal operation for months without anyone noticing. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Who's asking these questions? Lieutenant Murphy from Engineering, Petty Officer Stevens from Communications. Even Captain has been looking troubled lately. I think he's starting to wonder if maybe the court-martial was too quick. Sarah took a deep breath. Jake, I need you to do something for me. He nodded eagerly. Anything. I'll do anything to make this right. I need you to be brave, braver than you've ever been in your life. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in a rental car outside the gates of Naval Base San, watching the familiar flow of sailors entering and leaving. In the passenger seat beside her sat Jake Williams, pale and nervous but determined. You sure about this? Sarah asked for the 10th time. Jake nodded, though his hands were shaking. Martinez cornered me yesterday. He knows I've been acting strange. He suspects something. If I don't do this now, I might not get another chance. Sarah had spent those 3 weeks carefully planning their approach. Simply walking into the base and making accusations wouldn't work. They needed evidence, and they needed witnesses that Martinez couldn't intimidate or silence. Remember, Sarah said, Lieutenant Murphy is expecting you at 1500 hours. He thinks you're coming to discuss a maintenance issue. Once you're in his office, you tell him everything. Murphy's a good man. He won't let Martinez bury this. Jake took a deep breath. What if Martinez tries to stop me? He won't know until it's too late. Murphy will make sure of that. Sarah handed him a small recording device. Keep this hidden. Record everything just in case. Jake climbed out of the car, looking back once with a mixture of fear and determination. Sarah watched him walk through the base gates, then drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away to wait. The next 4 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. Every minute felt like an hour as she imagined what might be happening on the base. Had Jake found the courage to tell the truth? Had Murphy believed him? Or had Martinez somehow discovered their plan? Her phone rang at 7:30 p.m., Jake's number. It's done, he said, his voice shaky but relieved. Murphy recorded everything. He's called in the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They're opening a full investigation. Sarah closed her eyes and felt tears of relief streaming down her face. How did Murphy react? He was angry, really angry. Not at me, but at what happened to you. He said he'd had doubts about the court-martial from the beginning, but he couldn't prove anything. He's been gathering information for weeks, and my testimony was the missing piece. What about Martinez and? They're being watched. NCIS agents are already on the base. Murphy thinks they'll have enough evidence for arrests within days. Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Jake, you did the right thing. I know it wasn't easy. I should have done it months ago. I should have been brave enough to stand up to Martinez from the beginning. But you did it now. That's what matters. 2 days later, Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was Captain. Lieutenant, he said, and Sarah was surprised to hear her former rank. I need to see you. Can you come to the base? Sir, I'm not sure I'm allowed. You're my guest. I'll have an escort waiting at the gate. The ride through the base felt surreal. Everything looked the same, but Sarah felt like a different person than the one who had walked down that gangway in Disgrace just 2 months ago. Captain's office hadn't changed either. The same pictures on the wall, the same neat stacks of papers on his desk. But the man behind the desk looked older, more tired. Sit down, Sarah, he said, using her first name for the first time she could remember. She took the chair across from his desk, the same one she had sat in during those terrible days of accusation and investigation. Leaned back in his chair and studied her face. NCIS arrested Martinez, and this morning, they found evidence of a black market operation that had been going on for over a year. Stolen supplies, records, bribed civilians, the works. Sarah nodded, but didn't trust herself to speak. They also found evidence that you were deliberately framed. The money planted in your quarters had Martinez's fingerprints on it. Admitted under questioning that they chose you because you were clean, trustworthy, and lived alone. Stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the harbor. I failed you, Sarah. I let my faith in the evidence override my faith in the person I knew you to be. I rushed to judgment because the case seemed so clean, so obvious. Sir, you had evidence. I had lies dressed up to look like evidence. I should have dug deeper. I should have asked more questions. He turned back to face her. The Navy failed you. I failed you. And I'm sorrier than you'll ever know. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you for saying that, sir. Returned to his desk and picked up a folder. The Navy is prepared to offer you full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. Your record will be completely cleared, and will issue a public statement about the real criminals in this case. Sarah stared at the folder he was holding. Everything she had lost, everything she had worked for, was contained in those papers. Her career, her reputation, her future. But something had changed during her months of exile. She had learned things about herself she never would have discovered otherwise. She had found strength she didn't know she possessed. She had survived the worst thing that could happen to a person of honor, and she was still standing. Sir, I appreciate the offer, more than you know, but I need some time to think about it. Looked surprised. Of course, take all the time you need. The offer will remain open. As Sarah walked back through the base, she felt the stares again. But this time they were different. Word was already spreading about the arrests, about the truth of what had really happened. Some of the sailors she passed nodded respectfully. A few even saluted. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about her parents' restaurant, about the quiet streets of Riverside, about the new life she had been building from the ashes of the old one. Sometimes, she realized, losing everything was the only way to discover what you truly valued. Sarah stood on the deck of the USS Intrepid, but this time she wasn't walking away in disgrace. She had been invited back as an honored guest for a ceremony that Captain had insisted on holding. The entire crew was assembled on deck, standing at attention in their dress uniforms. The morning sun sparkled on the water of San Harbor, and a gentle breeze carried the salt smell that Sarah had always loved. Ladies and, Captain's voice carried across the deck through the ship's communication system. Today we right a terrible wrong. Sarah stood beside the captain. wearing a simple blue dress instead of the uniform she had once worn with such pride. In the weeks since the arrests of Martinez, she had wrestled with the decision of whether to return to active duty. The Navy had been more than generous in their attempts to make amends. Full reinstatement with back pay, a promotion to lieutenant commander, a new assignment on a ship of her choosing, an official commendation for her integrity in the face of false accusations. But Sarah had surprised everyone, including herself, by declining. "We are here," Captain continued, "to publicly acknowledge the grave injustice done to former Lieutenant Sarah, and to honor her 15 years of exemplary service to our country." The crowd was larger than just the ship's crew. Sarah could see her parents in the front row, her father in the one good suit he owned, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Jake Williams stood with his fellow petty officers, looking relieved but still carrying the weight of his earlier cowardice. Lieutenant was wrongfully accused, wrongfully tried, and wrongfully dismissed from the United States Navy. The evidence against her was fabricated by criminals who have now been brought to justice. But evidence alone cannot repair the damage done to a person's reputation and spirit. Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Admiral Hayes, who had flown in from Washington specifically for this ceremony. Admiral Hayes was a legend in the Navy, a woman who had broken barriers and fought battles that made Sarah's own struggles seem small. "The Navy owes you more than an apology," Admiral Hayes had told Sarah privately before the ceremony. "We owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Captain was still speaking. Throughout her ordeal, Lieutenant conducted herself with dignity, grace, and unwavering integrity. Even when faced with false accusations and public disgrace, she never wavered in her principles or sought revenge against those who had wronged her. Sarah thought about those dark weeks in Riverside, when she had indeed considered revenge. She had imagined confronting Martinez, imagined making him pay for what he had done to her. But somewhere along the way, her anger had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of peace that came from knowing the truth would eventually surface. "Today," Captain announced, "we present Lieutenant with the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for her outstanding service and her example of integrity under extreme adversity." The medal was beautiful, but it wasn't what moved Sarah the most. What moved her was seeing Jake Williams step forward from the ranks, tears in his eyes, and salute her with perfect precision. What moved her was seeing sailors who had once whispered about her now looking at her with respect and admiration. But what moved her most of all was seeing her parents' faces glowing with pride. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake Sarah's hand and offer their apologies. Some had believed in her innocence all along but had been afraid to speak up. Others admitted they had been too quick to judge. Lieutenant Murphy, the engineering officer who had helped expose the truth, was one of the last to approach her. "I have to ask," he said, "why didn't you take the reinstatement? Everyone expected you to come back." Sarah looked out at the harbor, where civilian boats moved peacefully alongside naval vessels. "I learned something during those months away from the Navy," she said. "I learned that I'm more than just my uniform. I spent so many years defining myself by my rank and my service that I forgot there were other ways to serve, other ways to make a difference." "What will you do now?" Sarah smiled. "My parents are getting older. The restaurant is too much work for them. I'm going to help them run it and maybe expand it. Riverside could use more good restaurants." Murphy looked confused. "But you're trained for so much more than that." "Am I, or am I trained for exactly what I need to do next?" Sarah shook his hand. "There's honor in serving your country, Lieutenant, but there's also honor in serving your family and your community." As the crowds began to disperse, Admiral Hayes approached Sarah one more time. "The offer stands," she said quietly. "If you ever change your mind, the Navy would be honored to have you back." "Thank you, Admiral. That means more to me than you know." Admiral Hayes studied Sarah's face. You know, I've seen a lot of officers face adversity in my career. Some break under the pressure. Others survive but carry bitterness for the rest of their lives. But you've done something rare. You've turned injustice into wisdom. I had good teachers, Sarah said, glancing toward her parents. Yes, Admiral Hayes agreed. I can see that. As Sarah walked down the gangway for the second time, she carried herself differently than she had 2 months ago. The first time, she had been broken and defeated. This time, she was whole and strong and ready for whatever came next. Her parents were waiting at the bottom of the gangway, beaming with pride. Ready to go home? Her father asked. Sarah looked back at the ship one last time, then at her parents, then at the city of Riverside in the distance where a new chapter of her life was waiting. Yes, she said, I'm ready. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the expanded dining room of a restaurant, watching her mother teach a cooking class to a group of Navy wives. The restaurant had grown from a simple family business into something much more meaningful, a gathering place for the military community and their families. The secret to good wonton soup, Lily was saying, is patience. You cannot rush the broth. Good things take time. Sarah smiled at the wisdom in her mother's words. Good things did take time, and patience had become Sarah's greatest teacher. The expansion had been Sarah's idea, but it had taken the whole community to make it happen. After word spread about Sarah's story and her decision to stay in Riverside, people had around the family in ways they never expected. The mayor had helped expedite permits for the renovation. Local contractors had offered their services at cost. The newspaper had written a feature story about the local hero who chose family over career, and suddenly everyone wanted to eat at its restaurant. But it wasn't just about the food. Sarah had created something unique, a place where military families could gather, share stories, and find support. Every Tuesday night was family night, where spouses could bring their children for a free meal while their partners were deployed. Every Thursday was Veterans Coffee, where older veterans could meet and reminisce with active duty personnel. Sarah called Maria Santos, one of the Navy wives who had become a regular customer. Could you help me with something? Sarah walked over to where Maria was sitting with her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia. Maria's husband was deployed on a 6-month mission, and Sarah knew the family was struggling. What's going on? Sarah asked, sitting down beside them. Sophia has to do a school report about heroes, Maria explained. She wants to write about you, but she's having trouble understanding what makes someone a hero. Sarah looked at the serious-faced little girl. What do you think makes someone a hero, Sophia? Someone who saves people, Sophia answered uncertainly. That's one kind of hero, Sarah agreed. But there are lots of different ways to be a hero. Your mom is a hero for taking care of you while your dad is away serving our country. Your dad is a hero for protecting our freedom. My parents were heroes for working hard their whole lives to build something good for their family. But what about you? Sophia pressed. Everyone says you're a hero because you were brave when bad things happened to you. Sarah considered the question carefully. I think maybe the most important thing about being a hero is getting back up when you fall down, and then helping other people get back up too. Sophia nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. Like when I fall off my bike and you help me get back on. Exactly like that. As Sarah returned to the kitchen, she reflected on how different her life had become. She woke up each morning not to the sound of reveille, but to the gentle bustle of her parents preparing for another day at the restaurant. Instead of navigating by stars and compass, she navigated by the rhythms of her community, school schedules, deployment calendars, and the changing needs of the families who had become her extended family. The front door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a familiar uniform. Jake Williams walked in, looking nervous but determined. He had visited several times since the ceremony, each time carrying more guilt than Sarah thought one person should bear. "Hi, Sarah," he said quietly. Jake, good to see you, the usual. He nodded and took a seat at the counter. Sarah prepared his favorite meal, her mother's beef and with fried rice, and sat down beside him. How are you doing? She asked. Better, the counseling is helping, and Commander says I'm doing good work in my new assignment. Jake had been transferred to a different ship after the investigation, partly for his own protection and partly to give him a fresh start. The transition had been difficult, but he was slowly rebuilding his reputation and his self-respect. I keep thinking about what you said, Jake continued, about how the most important thing is helping other people get back up. Yeah. There's a new seaman on our ship. No relation to the other. He's young, scared, making mistakes. Some of the senior petty officers are giving him a hard time, and I can see him starting to panic. Sarah nodded, understanding where this was going. I want to help him. I want to be the person for him that you were for me before everything went wrong. But I don't know if I have the right to mentor anyone after what I did. Sarah turned to face him fully. Jake, you made a terrible mistake under terrible pressure, but you also found the courage to make it right. That doesn't erase what happened, but it does give you something valuable to offer, experience with both failure and redemption. You really think I can help him? I think you might be exactly the person he needs. Someone who understands what it's like to be afraid, to make bad choices, and to find a way back to doing the right thing. Jake finished his meal in thoughtful silence, then left with a sense of purpose Sarah hadn't seen in him before. As the evening wound down and Sarah helped her parents clean up, she realized that this restaurant, this community, this quiet life of service, felt more like home than any ship ever had. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Admiral Hayes. Saw the article about your restaurant in Navy Times. Proud of you. Still have that job offer if you ever want it. Sarah smiled and typed back, Thank you, Admiral, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. Through the restaurant window, Sarah could see the lights of Naval Base Sand twinkling in the distance. Ships were coming and going, carrying sailors to destinations around the world. It was a life she had loved and been proud of. But sometimes the most important journey was the one that brought you home. 2 years after her discharge, Sarah was in the restaurant kitchen preparing for the evening rush when her father burst through the door with an expression she had never seen before. Sarah, he called, waving a newspaper, you need to see this. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and took the paper. The headline made her knees weak. 17 Warships to honor disgraced sailor. Navy plans unprecedented tribute to woman who chose family over career. What does it say? Her mother asked, hurrying over from the stove. Sarah read aloud, her voice shaking. In an unprecedented display of respect and recognition, 17 ships from the Pacific Fleet will participate in a special ceremony honoring former Lieutenant Sarah, who was wrongfully discharged 2 years ago and chose to rebuild her life in civilian service rather than return to active duty. The article went on to explain that Admiral Hayes had proposed the tribute after seeing how Sarah's story had inspired sailors throughout the fleet. Letters had poured in from ships around the world, from sailors who had heard about the woman who had faced false accusations with dignity, and then chosen to serve her community in a different way. The ceremony will take place next Saturday at 1400 hours, Sarah continued reading. All 17 ships will sound their horns in unison in a maritime salute traditionally reserved for heads of state and fallen heroes. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. 17 ships, Dad, that's thousands of sailors. David took his daughter's hands. They're not just honoring what you survived, Sarah. They're honoring what you chose to do with your life after. The next week passed in a blur of phone calls and preparations. The story had been picked up by national news outlets, and suddenly this restaurant was famous far beyond Riverside. Reporters wanted interviews. TV cameras showed up outside the restaurant. The mayor declared it Sarah Day in Riverside. But the attention made Sarah uncomfortable. "I didn't do anything special," she told every reporter who would listen. "I just tried to move forward with dignity." "That's exactly what makes it special," replied a journalist from the Washington Post. "In a world where everyone seeks revenge or fame after being wronged, you chose service and humility. That's news." Saturday arrived gray and foggy, but by noon the harbor was clearly visible. Sarah stood on a platform that had been erected on the pier, surrounded by hundreds of people who had come to witness the ceremony. Her parents flanked her on one side, Jake Williams on the other. Admiral Hayes stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and we gather today to honor a different kind of hero, Lieutenant Sarah, and yes, I still call her lieutenant because true leadership transcends rank, was failed by the institution she served with distinction for 15 years. Sarah could see the ships arranged in formation across the harbor, destroyers, cruisers, frigates, and even an aircraft carrier. Thousands of sailors standing at attention on their decks. When offered the chance to return to her career and her rank, Admiral Hayes continued, Lieutenant chose something more difficult. She chose to forgive. She chose to serve in a new way. She chose to build something positive from the ashes of injustice. Sarah thought about the last 2 years, the struggles to rebuild, the quiet satisfaction of serving her community, the letters from military families thanking her for creating a place where they felt understood and supported. "The ships you see before you represent more than military might," Admiral Hayes said. "They represent the values we fight to protect: honor, service, sacrifice, and the courage to do what's right even when it's hard." The Admiral turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, these sailors want to honor you not just for surviving an injustice, but for showing them what grace under pressure truly looks like." Admiral Hayes raised her hand, and across the harbor, 17 ship captains stood ready. "Present arms," the Admiral commanded. The sound that followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. 17 ships, in perfect unison, sounded their horns in a maritime salute that echoed across the water and through the hills of sand. The deep, resonant notes seemed to vibrate in Sarah's chest, in her bones, in her soul. It lasted 30 seconds but felt like forever. When the last echo faded across the water, there wasn't a dry eye on the pier. But the ceremony wasn't over. From each ship, small boats began approaching the shore. As they drew closer, Sarah could see that each boat carried a representative from its ship's crew. One by one, 17 sailors walked up to the platform. Each one carried a flag, the flag that had flown over their ship that morning. Each one presented their flag to Sarah with a crisp salute and a few words. From the crew of the USS, "Thank you for showing us what honor looks like." From the USS Michael Murphy, "Thank you for your service, past and present." From the USS, "You are an inspiration to every sailor who has ever faced adversity." By the time the last sailor had presented his flag, Sarah was surrounded by 17 flags representing 17 ships and thousands of sailors who had chosen to honor her. Jake Williams stepped forward and took the microphone. "Ma'am, if I may," he said, his voice stronger than Sarah had ever heard it. "These flags represent more than ships. They represent second chances. They represent the truth that it's never too late to do the right thing. They represent forgiveness and redemption." He turned to face the crowd. 2 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I let fear make me a coward, and an innocent woman paid the price. But Lieutenant didn't just forgive me. She showed me how to forgive myself and use my mistake to help others." Jake's voice cracked with emotion. "That's the kind of leader worth following. That's the kind of person worth honoring." As the formal ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing alone on the platform, surrounded by 17 flags that represented something she was only beginning to understand. Admiral Hayes approached her one final time. "Lieutenant, I have one more thing for you." She handed Sarah an envelope with the seal of the Secretary of the Navy. Sarah opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter on official letterhead, but the words were personal and heartfelt. Lieutenant, your story has reached the highest levels of our government and military. Your example of grace, forgiveness, and continued service has inspired not just sailors, but Americans from all walks of life. You have shown us that true heroism isn't just about facing the enemy in battle. It's about facing injustice with dignity and choosing to build rather than destroy. Today's ceremony was requested by the sailors themselves. They wanted to honor you because you represent the best of what we strive to be. People who serve others, who choose integrity over convenience, and who find ways to make the world better even after the world has been unfair to them. You may have left the Navy, Lieutenant, but you never stopped being a sailor. Thank you for your continued service to your community and your country. It was signed by the Secretary of the Navy himself. Sarah looked out at the harbor where the 17 ships were beginning to return to their positions. On each deck, sailors were still standing at attention, still saluting in her direction. Her parents approached, tears streaming down their faces. "We are so proud," her mother whispered, "not just of today but of who you've become." Her father put his arm around her shoulders. "You know what this means, don't you?" Sarah looked at him questioningly. "It means that sometimes the greatest honor comes not from the rank you hold, but from the life you choose to live." As the sun began to set over Sand Harbor, Sarah stood surrounded by family, friends, and 17 flags that would forever remind her that honor isn't something that can be taken away by false accusations or corrupt officials. Honor is something you carry inside yourself, something you prove every day through your choices, your actions, and your commitment to serving others. The woman who had once walked down a gangway in disgrace had become something far greater than she had ever been in uniform. She had become a symbol of redemption, forgiveness, and the quiet heroism of everyday service. And as the last of the 17 ships disappeared into the evening mist, Sarah knew that her real journey was just beginning. The flags would hang in the restaurant, where they would inspire other people facing their own battles to remember that defeat is never final, that truth eventually surfaces, and that sometimes the greatest victory is simply choosing to keep serving others, no matter what the world has done to you. In the end, they hadn't cast her off the ship in disgrace at all. They had launched her toward her true destiny,